While we sleep, the guardians of the night take to the streets, having said goodbye to those they love. Each other knowing they may never say these words again, they face the evil that we run from. They dedicate their lives to those that would hate them because they wear the badge. They wear the badge not for the glory or recognition, but for the passion to help others. This is the LEO First Podcast. We'll talk to the men and women in law enforcement, those that have retired, those that keep the prisons secure, and anyone who's impacted by law enforcement. We'll peel back the curtain and you'll get the real stories, the good, the bad, and the ugly. Every law enforcement officer has a story to tell. Get ready to hear from the men and women who put their lives on the line every day for their communities and their country. Welcome to the LEO First Podcast. Now, here's your host, Michael Laidler.
Hey everybody, it's Michael Laidler, your host of the LEO First Podcast. We're coming back to you again with another amazing episode, and we're going to dive deeper into the correctional setting as far as mental wellness and leadership goes. I know a lot of the other podcasts tends to circle around police, federal agents, sheriffs, and that's what society typically sees when they see law enforcement. However, there's a whole nother part of law enforcement that tends to be put on the back burner, and it's just because it's easy to forget these people in these roles. So our guest tonight is going to share her experiences from the correctional standpoint as far as mental wellness, leadership, work-life balance, and she's going to tell you guys another perspective that sometimes we may not always see. I know we had a few other guests that was in the correctional setting, but typically most of my guests, 75% to probably 90%, tends to be some type of other law enforcement. So I'm excited to have her on. And one side note, we actually started in federal corrections together 10 years ago. So we've been able to kind of keep up with each other's career. I went a slightly different path, and she stayed in the path that she was in, which I probably would have. That's where I started as well. And as we get into the show, she'll explain why and where she's at with that. But without me continuing to ramble on and talk crazy stuff this late at night, we're going to introduce our guest tonight, Andrea Ballesteros. Tell us about you.
Hey, thanks for having me on the show. A little bit about me. I'm a psychologist in the federal correctional system. I started, like Michael said, 10 years ago, and I started as a staff psychologist over at Coleman in Florida, and now I've promoted my way up to deputy chief psychologist. But first and foremost, I'm a mom, a wife. Mental health is my passion. It is my training. But one of the things I like about corrections is that it's not my only area, and I'm able to kind of branch off into other areas like leadership and staff wellness. One of the things with corrections that I have found over the past 10 years is that a lot of times we come in, and especially as in mental health, we're looking at inmate focus. How are we going to, reduce recidivism? But we don't see the overall impact that it has on staff and how we can improve agencies as a whole.
And it's cool how you brought up early the different opportunities you've been able to capture while working in a correctional setting, because once again, for me, I know by the time I got into corrections, I was already 8 years into law enforcement, and I truly did not know how many different facets there were. It's essentially its own world. It has its own leadership, psychology, officers, medical staff, human resources, a financial office. And that's just not in the federal side. That's the state, the county, the private sector. As you got deeper into your career, into law enforcement, to corrections, like, when did you start to realize that corrections was as beneficial and helpful to your life as maybe being in a police department or a sheriff's office?
Well, that's funny that you say that, because I questioned my path a while coming into this career. Ever since I was young, like sixth grade, people find it weird that I wanted to go into some type of law enforcement I really thought I wanted to go into corrections. Just a little bit of my background. I grew up in some not so easy schools, a little bit rougher around the edges. And so I saw a lot of the impact of having parents in and out of prison on people that worked around me or that grew up around me. So it was always my passion of law enforcement. So I went into psychology. Psychology and criminology, pre-law, all that kind of stuff, thinking I'd come in again to improve the recidivism rates and kind of look at care and treatment and mental health. However, once I got in 10 years ago, the world opened up. Like you said, it is such a world inside of our society where there are so many moving parts that it just encaptured my interest of how does this huge system work and how do all the moving parts come together to create an environment that is conducive to both staff and, keep the safety of the people that are in our care, as well as the officers that are working inside these walls that come in and out every day and have to, experience some of the things that they have to experience and then go home and somehow figure out how to create a balance with their home life and, be able to mesh the two worlds together.
It's interesting how you've been able to do that. And for those that don't follow Andrea anywhere on any kind of social media, she's always posting fitness, she's always posting family time, she's highlighting different things that she's doing even outside of work to kind of emphasize how important that balance is. When did you realize that you had to actually focus on that work-life balance? And because we all get to that point to where we're doing more work than home. Did you find a point to where you said, hey, you know what, I'm doing too much? Or was it just a natural thing to ensure that you had that balance all the time?
It was always came somewhat natural in the sense of I knew that I wanted to prioritize both things. I knew that work was incredibly important to me, but I didn't want to lose track of my home life. As I came up in my career, I looked to mentors and I looked to other people to be like, ask them, how do you manage this? How do you make the most out of this career while also maintaining a good family home life? Because we see the divorce rates, we see the suicide rates, we see all the things that come out in the literature and the research about our field. And I knew that going into it. So I knew that I had to prep and create habits and create a lifestyle that was going to manage the best that I could. Now, I also feel that we work in a field that it's difficult because you can't always talk about things that happen inside the walls at home to individuals that may not understand exactly what you see or what you deal with, or even some of the humor that we have to use to kind of make it through a day-to-day basis. So you have to have those relationships at work as well to be able to kind of feel like it is kind of a family. You feel connected to those individuals that you work with.
I know my time at Coleman, and that's in Florida. I always felt the welcome, warm environment. Like that was one of the things that I always enjoyed in my short time there before I moved away. But I felt like that culture, at least from my personal experience, was always promoting that. Even if they didn't realize it, they were promoting mental well-being. They were promoting healthy relationship. They were promoting getting together, trying to spend time with each other. Do you find that continuing? Do you find it's been maybe diminishing because of staffing? How do you see it going on nowadays?
Yeah, I mean, I feel like that is one of the crossroads that especially corrections is in due to staffing. And I actually think that's most of law enforcement. You've seen staffing levels go down. Not that many people seem to get excited about the field as much as I feel like they used to when we were younger. So it's definitely posed a threat or has diminished somewhat in the sense of when you're seeing these officers working mandates and they're exhausted and they don't really want to stay after and play softball like we used to, because they're just ready to get home and go to sleep so that they can come back and work their next 8. It's definitely posed an obstacle, but I also feel like inside the wall, you work with these young people every day, that there's still, especially at the penitentiary, if you remember, like, you have to be able to be in sync. You have to be able to be
Correct.
one with each other. If not, you're not going to be able to, do your daily task and be able to respond to the emergencies and the things that happen at a high security institution.
Yeah, and it's crazy how now we have to actually try harder to continue the relationships, because you're right, with staffing being down and just the atmosphere, people are just more tired. They're like, hey, although I'm driving past the training center or I'm passing this event that's going on at my facility, I'm just tired. Like I don't have anything left in me. As people look to come into the agency, especially from the psychology standpoint, how do you promote it to say, you know what, I know we're a little short now, but we are building towards that goal?
I think it's about making relationships. So I have a mentor, and I remember him when I was going through a little rough patch. I was put on a work group, and he was a warden at the time. And every person he walked through, he would say hello to. He would introduce himself. He would make that personal connection with that individual. The next day we'd go to training. He would remember that individual and tidbits of their conversation. And so that's something that I've kind of started to try to be more intentional about doing, and introducing myself when I see a new staff member, when I see someone that's walking by that, maybe looking in space because they're tired, just making those personal connections and being like, yeah, like, I'm not trying to say that you shouldn't be tired. You are exhausted. But at the same time, if we slowly get there, we're all kind of working in the same way and keeping those relationships strong, the agency will come back to, to where it was, where we could kind of promote that family and those connections even stronger than they already are right now.
When we look at law enforcement as a whole, including corrections, which is law enforcement as well, probation, parole, I don't foresee the staffing improving drastically over the next few years. I don't see it. And the reason I say that is that it ain't just us in law enforcement that's suffering with staffing. It's almost every industry as a whole. So it's not like it's like, oh, well, it's just law enforcement, but the business sector is thriving, or it's only law enforcement and retail is killing it. It's none of that. So one of the things that I think does and will help people out is something that you mentioned about having a mentor. Did you find that process tough acquiring one, or was it just something that you knew you had to do and then you just push for it?
It was something that I knew I had to do, and I had to find the right people. So when I first started, I was looking for that mentor, and I found it in someone not even in psychology, not even anywhere that I would communicate with, but I saw someone that was doing things, talking to people, the way he carried himself, the way that he talked to his staff, talked about his staff. He always put his staff first, talked about how well they were doing, and he always gave them all the credit. And I was like, that is someone I want to have in my life in this agency. And to this day, I go to that individual and, talk to him. And throughout my career, I have just found those people that, exemplify characteristics that I want to have, or that I think I have, but, I want to continue to improve and support myself and surround myself with individuals that are going to do that. And I try really hard to talk to those individuals, introduce myself, ask them questions, and keep in touch with them. And most of the time, because of the people that they are, the characteristics that they have, they are more than willing to take on mentees, even when they probably have so much on their plate. They see the value in that mentor-mentee relationship. And I've been very blessed with having those people in my life in this career, because I feel like in law enforcement, not just corrections, it's so easy to get off track. It is so easy to get into a negative mindset, or to look at individuals that aren't doing everything, the way they should, or maybe not working their full, 8 hours or whatever it is, and say, well, if they can do it, I'm going to do it. But me as a person never wanted to be that individual. So I always sought people that also didn't want to be those individuals and weren't those individuals. But it is a little more difficult, because you have to kind of put yourself out there and make those relationships, which aren't always going to just, fall on your lap.
And it's a system. Like you described a really good process that I've used as well, because sometimes you're right. The mentors aren't just going to walk up to you and say, hey, do you need help? Or can I guide you on this path? You have a really good system where you observe a person and you say, okay, he or she carries themselves in a way that I'm trying to carry myself, or they're in a situation that I'm trying to get myself into. Then you take the opportunity, you take the willpower to go and put yourself out there and make that connection. And you never know if they're going to say yes or no, but most people are typically honored when you say, hey, can you mentor me? Like, people actually, right? Most people, especially if you've had time to observe them, they appreciate that.
Right. And most of the time, if they're demonstrating qualities that you want, they're going to be people that want to mentor. They're going to be people that are, value those types of relationships, because they probably had it in their career. So I think putting yourself out there is going to be the first step. Now, I will say that I look very much at characteristics and not positions. So a lot of my mentors have not always been wardens or, people of the executive staff. They've been other department heads, people that are officers, line staff. It doesn't always, the position isn't always what guides me to look for a mentor. I was talking to someone the other day talking about how my SHU crew, which is our special housing unit, the officers that work down there, when I first started, they were some of my strongest mentors. I was 27 years old walking into penitentiary as a psychologist who has, female, small build, not a lot of experience in this world. And if it wasn't for the officers mentoring me, I would not be where I am today.
And that's because leadership comes in all forms. It doesn't have to have a title associated with it. When you're growing, well, I know when I was growing up, I thought that a leader had to be someone with the title, because I didn't know any better. And obviously, as I matured, I studied more, I read more, and I was like, you know what? A leader can be someone that's considered a subordinate when it comes to pay grade or rank, but it's not that they aren't a leader because they don't have the title. Maybe that's just not the role they want, but they have all the characteristics of that type of person that we want to display. And I know I felt that same love from people that were peers or people that were considered subordinates. And it's been really good. It's nice to know people out there that care. And I think it also says something about your own way you display yourself and demonstrate, because sometimes even people that you may see as possible mentors, if you're not carrying yourself in the right way, they may not be willing. So have you found that to be, or do you think that could be a roadblock if someone's not carrying their self in a way that will promote them being a good mentee?
Yeah, definitely. And I mean, it depends on the mentor, but I know that I've had mentees where I've had to have the difficult conversations where tell them, like, you say you're not getting the results you want, but what are you doing? What characteristics may you be displaying at this moment that aren't actually putting yourself in the light that will get you, a certain position or a certain opportunity because of something that you're currently doing right now? I think it's hard for people to kind of look at themselves and analyze and see how their behavior is impacting negatively their ability to achieve their goals.
Yeah, because any like we were saying, any good mentor or anybody that has those characteristics, strong-willed, charismatic, positive, go-getter, things like that, they are going to want to have someone that they can lead because that's part of their mentality. However, at the same time, they don't want anybody that they're going to have to drag to the finish line. They want to help bring them there, but they don't want to be pushing them the entire time. So I know in my situations where I've been a mentor, even a mentee, those are things that I've had to look at on both sides. I've had to say, well, if I'm a mentee, what am I doing to let that mentor know that I'm giving my best effort? Am I showing up on time? Am I studying? Am I following the words he or she provides me? And then flip it to the mentor side. Is that mentee actually listening, or are they just doing it to say they have me as a mentor? So it is something that goes both ways. And if you're not doing your role, then it's going to be hard for that mentor to succeed, to help you do to help you get to where you're trying to go.
Yeah, and being open to feedback. I mean, I think that's one of the biggest things, that if, you have an ego and you say, I'm doing everything I'm supposed to be doing, however, you're not open to feedback. I've had plenty of mentees that are sitting there struggling, and when you give them feedback, they're like, no, that's not it. But then I've had other mentees that are sitting there being like, oh, let me think about that. And they'll go home and they'll come back the next day, be like, man, I really thought about that. This is why I think you may be right. This is why I think you may be wrong. And they're able to have that open dialogue regarding, aspects that may be affecting the way that others perceive them, the way that they may come off to, people in the hierarchy, in regards to their work ethic and their motivation and, things of that nature.
While we're on the topic of leadership, you mentioned early on during your introduction that you've entered into a leadership role and you've been in that role for some time now. Did you always foresee yourself going into a leadership role by title, or was that one of the things that once you became confident in your own skills, you're like, you know what, I can make an impact from this next level?
That's funny. So when I first started the Bureau, I had a game plan by title. I was going to move up and end up in central office and change the world and change psychology and do all the things. And then slowly, as I was in the job and again had mentors in all different realms, from officers to wardens, I've kind of changed my perspective, and I really like the impact that I was making locally. So even when I was offered ability to move around and move up, I turned a lot of those down because of that work. One is the work-life balance, because my husband also has a really good job, and moving was more difficult for us to be able to plan. I have my mom close by, so she's able to be a part of my kids' lives. But mostly was the impact I was making at Coleman. I felt like I was able to build some really strong relationships, and was part of the employees club. So doing some of the staff wellness, staff events, the crisis management teams. There was so many options that I felt that if I moved too quickly, that my impact would be diminished by not being able to have this long-term relationships like I've been able to right now.
And it's always cool because it's the little collateral duties and the other things you can do that's outside of your normal duties that allows you to connect with people at different levels. And once again, that's one of the beauties of the federal corrections, that it allows you to venture out. You don't have to just be into your discipline. For example, psychology. You don't have to only be a psychologist. You can be a part of an employees club program. You could be part of other diversity programs. You could be just involved with building the staff as well, rather than just only working for inmates or with the inmates. And it's another thing that when people look at the uniform of corrections, police, sometimes they forget that you're probably doing more than one thing. And if you're in a uniform, there's other things you can do. Now, obviously, we can't we can't undervalue how hard some of these officers are working. The mandatories, the multiple shifts, multiple days in a row. We can't take that away. But sometimes when you hear people say, "Oh, there's nothing else to do," it's like, well, you don't want to say that. Now, if you're tired, that's a reasonable excuse. But if you're saying there's nothing else for you to do, then that's something that you have to seek in yourself, because there's always more opportunities to get more involved with your work community to help build yourself up and to kind of enjoy what you're doing.
Yeah, and I think that's where a lot of people get lost, is just they come to work, and they get so into the daily grind and the 8 hours and probably the mandate that comes with it, which is exhausting and tiring, especially when you're dealing with, running to fights and a lot of the things that, we see where, that's where you talk about PTSD among corrections. It's huge. But some of the ways to counter that is getting involved, feeling those connections, making those relationships outside of like that daily grind. And that's one of the things that I feel like gets lost when people just get into a mindset where they'd rather just either talk negatively or not see past just coming in and doing their 8 and going home.
Yeah, it's definitely something to expand as far as like when you're thinking about your own relationships and how you're going to counter these events, because they're going to come up. I mean, you're going to be tired. You're going to have bad things that happen throughout your career, especially in law enforcement. I mean, if you're not in law enforcement, you're listening. If you don't think things that are traumatic happen constantly, then I would just say go work in a correctional setting for a year. And you know what? Let me not even say a year. Let me just say I do it a month. Do it a month. Just to see what you're going to be exposed to, because what you see on TV or what you don't hear in the media definitely underscores what's really going on. Like it's not a fair assessment of what happens daily. So for you, and you don't have to, the question I'm going to ask, you don't have to describe the scenario, but everybody's had their longest day at work. How did you overcome that longest day, whatever day it might have been in the last 10 years?
I think it goes back to connection. So when we have those long days that are exhausting, and whether it's an inmate suicide or a homicide or whatever it may be, there's times where we have multiple fights that break out. Those days, and I remember one, it was the staff that came and like checked on you and made sure that you were doing okay and made sure that you had everything you needed, as well as just kind of lighten the scenario, not to make jokes or make fun of it, but to kind of just be like, hey, I'm here with you. Like, this was crazy. I can't believe that happened. And just to be present, I think is incredibly important. If I were to have gone home without having that relief of being able to process that with other individuals, I think I would have been stuck in my head. And one of the things I like to do is really try to leave work at work. Like, I don't try to talk a lot about it. There's a healthy balance to that, but I really don't try to talk too much about everything at work, because when I'm home, I want to be present with my children. I want to be, being able to dedicate my time to them and what's going on in their lives, and really kind of separate myself a little bit from the chaos that comes in working in corrections.
Well, we know there's all types of programs out there for mental wellness. There's employee assistance programs, there's crisis support teams, there's just resources you could just type in online, even if you're not connected to any kind of organization, that allows you to vent. What do you think is the roadblock that we still face in law enforcement that keeps our people from actually getting involved in some of these programs?
I mean, I pause because that's kind of a loaded question in the sense of like there's
Yeah.
it's so individualized, right?
Mm-hmm.
It depends on the person. So you could say, the standard of it's stigmatized and that we don't want to reach out to individuals. But I know a lot of people that do reach out to these programs, that do try to reach out, and they just don't feel the connection. They don't feel like they can really speak truly. They don't feel like the person on the other line kind of understands. And I think that's why a lot of individuals that I've talked to kind of stop going to those sessions. Even though, you try to encourage them and then say, they don't have to be in the field. They don't have to understand or like go through what you go through to completely be able to help you. It is a roadblock in the sense of, are they really going to get it? Are they going to judge me? Or is it really helping? And like, how much of this do I have to do? Because I know individuals that, they would try to go on their lunch break, or even if they got relieved for an hour, to go have an EAP session, but they're still in the setting, right? So like, how do you walk out of a correctional setting to go sit in your car to talk to EAP and then walk right back in and expect that session to like really get in depth to what you need to talk about to address your actual symptoms and wellness and what's going on within you? It's a hard balance.
Yeah. And I like the fact that you brought that up, because as you were talking about it, that's what I was thinking about. Like, as soon as you said someone just go on their break to go do an EAP session, like, they're not really detaching themselves enough to fully engage in the process. So although they're involved in it, they're not really there. So for that person, if they came to you and said, Dr. Ballesteros, I've been doing this EAP now for 6 months, and I do it when I'm at work, and I don't know why I'm not getting any results. Like, what are some things you would suggest to them to try to, I guess, constructively guide them in the path of why it's not working, or why it could not be working?
Well, I mean, a lot of times I just tell them, like, it's really hard. And I always compare it to, like, if you were in the military. Let's say that's an easy comparison. If you were in the military and you were in a kind of a war zone or kind of a high intensity place, you can't all of a sudden take yourself out of it for an hour and then expect yourself to be decompressed and detached and engage in a therapy session and then go right back into it, right? Like, that is, your brain does not function that way. And so most of the time when individuals get out of the military, and again, our system needs to improve in that sense as well, but they try to go through a period of kind of deprogramming.
Yes.
And again, they need a lot more of it, and that's a whole other conversation to have. But we, in corrections and in law enforcement in general, I've said this for a long time, we don't have those resources most of the time. We get, like, specifically in the federal corrections, you get 6 EAP sessions per problem, like, and you do those while you're working. It's really hard to navigate those two worlds and really be able to get to the core of whatever's going on, especially if it's work related.
Yeah, and honestly, and well, that's a great way to segue or to kind of reemphasize the work-life balance, because I think you have a really good system that allows you to separate the two. But there's a lot of people, most people, that can't separate it, and they can't just turn off that work and turn on the switch for the life outside of work. So when it comes to even to the EAP sessions, it always amazes me how people try to turn it off, or they think they turn it off, but they're not really. They're really just suppressing it because they're hiding it away. Yeah, I mean, they're like, oh yeah, I'm good now.
Yeah.
And then like 5 minutes later, they're at home eating dinner. They're thinking about it. It's like, but they're trying to hide it because they don't want people to think that they have problems at home. So like have you seen that play a factor in like some of these sessions, like as far as like people getting the most out of the 6? I think this year it went up to 10, I believe. I'm not sure. But regardless, I don't think 10 is enough. I'm just saying, like, obviously the government has to cut it somewhere because there's funding, and in theory, if let's say all 36,000 Bureau of Prisons employees actually does it, the government probably just go broke on sessions alone because somebody's paying for the EAP sessions. That's what, you know what I mean? And then at some point you start paying out of your pocket. But how do you find that push to kind of get yourself in there?
I think part of it is about just, like I said, creating habits. I will get up in the morning and I work out at 4 a.m. Before work, and that kind of preps me and gets my mind going, gets my body ready. I go to work. I have an hour drive home where I kind of process the day, and then when I get home, it's a lot of running around with the kids. But I think it's about creating these habits where EAP is, and other programs, it's not just EAP, I don't want to focus on that one, but a lot of these programs are more solution focused, and they will refer out if you need, further treatment. But it's finding a balance within your daily life that you build in that ability to process and cope and deal with whatever you have going on between work before you get home. So whether that is a workout, whether that is a podcast, whether that is reading a book, reading 15 minutes, getting home. I know individuals that get home and just take like a 20-minute shower, and they tell their family, like, I don't want to speak right now until I'm out of the shower, and they kind of establish that routine. It's the daily habits that we establish to kind of be able to create that work-life balance and establish some of that wellness that we need so that we aren't so dependent on other sources.
As I think about what you're saying, I think about like the role of leadership in mental wellness programs. And actually, that's one of the programs that I've found myself teaching more and instructing more and researching more, because I believe there's still a big gap between the mental wellness stigma and the leader's role in promoting it. I do believe we have great programs out there. I believe that there's so many different avenues that people can take. However, if a leader's not involved in that process, whether it's a direct supervisor, a middle manager, department head, a CEO, a warden, a chief of police, a sheriff, whatever that might be, I don't believe any employee at any level that's using these benefits will maximize what they're doing. Because, as just going back to the example you gave about that officer that is taking an hour break to go do an EAP session to call. For me, and obviously you can only suggest it to the employee, but I'm wondering if that leader say, hey, no, man, you need to schedule it to where you can go and not come back, or you need to schedule it to where you're truly focused, because I need you to be 100% when you're here or 100% when you're in therapy. But if you're trying to balance the two, I don't think it works that way. But for me, it starts. Some of it is leadership as well. I know the more I look into it, the more I realize that leaders maybe aren't pushing against the programs, but I don't believe it's being enough promotion of the programs. How have you experienced that on the leadership side? Like leaders be involved, like true, like authentically, okay, they're truly involved with the leadership, like the mental wellness programs. What have you seen?
I mean, I definitely think they refer and they seem to promote it. I just think it's a lot of lack of understanding, maybe. But also, I think it comes to communication and the way we talk about the balance and how to manage the stress. So I think a lot of, that old school mentality of, well, let's just not talk about it. We're not going to deal with it. You just need to move on and you're going to be fine. I think we've slowly gotten away from that, which has been positive. But we're still not everyone. There's a lot of leaders, but not everyone in leadership is able to have those hard conversations with their staff on, how are you doing? I know, for example, there was one time we had a few overdoses and I had a new staff member, and I was like, listen, it's okay if you're not okay. It's okay if this world seems a little bit different than what you imagined when you went to graduate school. That these are conversations that we need to be able to have with our staff, with our peers, to say, we can talk about this. I know we experience it. I know that there's these programs out there, but how are you doing? You may not need an EAP. You may not need to go that far, but I want you to know that I care about your well-being. I care about how you're doing. I care about how you're bringing this home and how you're managing the balance of working in a difficult environment, whether that's corrections or any law enforcement. Because we don't have a lot of support outside of our own agencies. And even when we retire or get out of the system, there's not a lot of follow through after that, and that's one of the reasons they say a lot of individuals in corrections pass after retiring, is because the stress. I mean, after living for 20 years on a high stress environment, and all of a sudden you're left with no stress, your body doesn't know how to adjust to that.
Yeah, that's always the studies that highlight what you're saying all never seem to amaze me. Like, they never seem to shock me when I see something say just that to the effect like, yeah, this person passed away because they were used to having adrenaline highs for 30 years, and now they're at the house and it's like, okay, what am I doing? Like, I didn't clean the house 6 times in an hour. What am I going to do next? I mean, but it's crazy how that goes.
Yeah, I mean, your body is a bunch of chemicals, right? The way your brain works, the way your body functions, and when you function at a certain level of chemicals, and then that chemical completely drops, is a shock to your body. Your body doesn't know how to react to it, and then now you've depleted your body of that chemical, and you're either trying to find ways to increase it, or you haven't established those habits that I've talked about, where now you're engaging in unhealthy eating or behaviors or drinking or whatever it may be to kind of pass the time, because there's not a lot that has been established and a lot of habits that have been done where you feel like that you can keep the same kind of chemicals, same kind of levels of these hormones up in your brain and in your body to be able to keep it going. And then it also just prones you to sickness.
Yeah, and really understanding your body is important, because what you're like, I love the fact that you're bringing up the true scientific side of some of this, because it's sometimes rough for when people think that they can defeat this without understanding it, because they think that because, oh, I don't cry or I don't feel that way, that their body's just different. But what they don't understand is that there's things still going on that they may not see at age 35, but at age 55, when they don't have that environment no more, they haven't been working on for 20 years. Now their brain's like, hey, you've been putting me on the back burner for the last 20 years. Now I'm going to do what I have to do. So a lot of it's chemical.
So I remember I worked at VA for about a year. Mm-hmm. And a lot of the veterans that came in were retired Vietnam vets. And they were like, I did fine. I've been fine for 30 years. And all of a sudden I retired and now I'm having issues. Like, what's going on, doc? And I was always like, it's your body. You worked, you got out of the military and you took on a job that was stressful. So your body knew how to react to that job. And it just continued functioning the way you were functioning while you were in the military. And then now you've retired and there's nothing to replace, you know, the cortisol levels, the adrenaline. There's nothing to replace these hormones, and your body doesn't know what to do. And the immune system just breaks down. And then, you know, you can either get sick or you may have things from the past come up. And so that's why if we don't establish these wellness activities throughout your career, it's going to impact you at some point. You can't just avoid it forever.
I want you to give that example again, because it's very relevant to law enforcement at all levels, because we all try to circumvent what may not happen to us, but we don't know what we're not preparing for years, if not decades later. So just give that example of your time working with these vets when you're in the VA, kind of like that conversation you had to have with some of them.
Yeah. I mean, it was multiple of them that just would come in, and I would talk to them about, you know, their time. And again, in law enforcement, a lot of our individuals are veterans, but they would go in the military and they would be overseas and they functioned at a certain level. And when our brains are functioning at a certain level of cortisol, which is our stress hormone, and there's just all these different types of hormones that I won't get into right now, but it creates like these brain pathways, right? So our brain knows how to function that way. It knows how to function that way, and it's easy. And we just create these abilities to function at a high level of stress, a high level of adrenaline. And then we go into a job that usually has similar stress. And so those pathways just keep getting stronger and stronger and stronger. And then our bodies are used to that. And then we retire. And if there is nothing there, if there's nothing that you've created, nothing to take its place, then your brain's pathways aren't connecting the same that it used to. And it's got to create new pathways, new ways of functioning, new ways of dealing with lower stress without the high intensity activity and what's happening. And then that's when a lot of times, you know, our bodies, our immune system starts to kind of break down and become more susceptible to illness and other stress factors that may happen with it.
For the people listening, I want you guys to definitely take a true note on what she said over the last 5 minutes, more probably 10 minutes, just based on how your body operates. Like, once again, there's a lot of things that are going on in your body that you may not realize right now, but over time, it's building certain things that if it's not addressed early, you're gonna pay for it on the back end. I mean, and Andrea, she's telling you guys, you have veterans that you know have been in high stress situations like yourself, especially if you're in a correctional setting, law enforcement. You've seen bad crashes, you've seen inmates stabbed, you've had to see dead people, whatever it might be. But you have to start building that response early on. You have to have those outlets sooner than later, because you don't want to be catching yourself off guard. Like, why am I getting dizzy all of a sudden when I'm just walking? Or why is my blood pressure up? And sometimes it's because you have suppressed feelings that you thought was okay to keep in because you were able to handle it when you were in your early 20s, your 30s, even your 40s. But now you're in your 50s and 60s and you're golfing or plant or gardening, which is a completely different stress from being in a law enforcement setting where you see violence, or your stress just based on maybe something the leader did around you or a peer. So when you're looking at your own situations, you have to address that sooner than later.
Yeah, it's crazy to think that some of the people that I've worked with and worked for, you know, they talk about that sometimes they sleep better after these stressful days than they have like when they're in retirement or when they're not having stressful days, and they don't understand why. And it's our body reacts, you know, it's called somatically, and it just creates these tensions in our body that you don't even know where they're coming from, but they're created from whatever experiences you're having that day. And especially males tend to be that way because males aren't usually taught to express their feelings or really talk about what's going on with their emotions. Instead, it's expressed in their body and somatically, and how they feel, their muscles, their aches, all that kind of stuff, which is easier to push through when you're 20 than it is when you're 60.
Yeah, your body's just built different. I mean, it is just like, even if you look
Right.
at physical fitness, I mean, you got the 20-year-old Marine lifting 300 pounds right now. That same Marine 40 years later trying to lift 300 pounds, it's a broken bone. Same thing. You now
Right.
take that comparison to your brain, and that highly stressful situation, maybe you're in combat, or let's say you're in corrections and you're responding to these stabbings and these fights, and your 20-year-old brain is going to be a lot different than your 60-year-old brain processing these same events. And not knowing where it's coming from, I think it's tougher sometimes people to recognize, because most people are in the moment when they come to that. And then once they're seeing someone at your level later on in life, they're like, man, I wish I would have known this 3 decades ago.
Yeah, and that's what all my Vietnam vets used to tell me when I was at the VA. They're like, oh, why didn't anyone tell me this before? And I'm like, I don't know.
And somebody, the interesting and crazy part about that, someone probably did say something. But when we're, once again, like people that are sort of physically, like they're physically active, they're athletes, they're doing these great workouts. You tell them right now, hey, you keep doing that 10 years later, you're going to have a strained foot, or a sprained foot. You're going to have something. Like, nah, that's not going to happen to me. So they're hearing it, but they're not listening to it.
Oh, yeah.
So,
yeah, and I think that happens to a lot of us, especially in this field, because, when you're young, you're coming in and you're full force ready to take on the world. And, by the time you notice, 10, 15 years have gone by and you haven't established these habits and this ability to take care of yourself. And now your body's starting to feel it.
and it's just crazy how all of that works. And it's like the underlining concepts of how your body works. And I know on the surface it's hard for us to understand, but when you start breaking it down, especially at your level and levels of counselors and therapists, and you start kind of peeling back that onion, you're like, oh man, there's a lot of things that I can address early rather than later, and it helps with the
Right.
transition in life. So as you've gone up in leadership roles, do you find your impact increasing now, or increasing more now than when you were not a leader? A leader by title. Let me clarify. Sorry, let me clarify.
Yeah, differently. But I think I've been lucky that I've stayed at the same place, that I have found different ways to lead. Before, it was a lot of individual conversations with officers. I was learning a lot. Now that I'm more in this role, I have a bigger impact institution-wide, and I am able to kind of communicate with different department heads. And being in the title does give you a little bit more ability to voice your opinion and kind of make things happen, in the sense of, there's this leadership idea. There was a leadership training that I thought would be important, and being able to be sitting in the right chairs, you're able to kind of push those through and make an impact, a wider impact than you do without the title, right? So part of it is the title does create opportunities. It also creates opportunities to influence other individuals in leadership. So all this stuff about staff wellness that we've talked about, all this stuff about kind of taking care of yourselves and how to approach and how to have these conversations, these are things that I've sat with wardens and AWs and execs about, and not mentored them, but kind of just had the conversations with them to be like, hey, we need to look at how we're approaching this. Do you think that saying this at a recall is really going to increase staff wellness or even increase staff morale? Or will it differently make the message more clear and be received better? So I think that being able to move up and kind of get in the roles I have seen my ability to kind of impact different departments, the institution as a whole, and even, you know, the agency sometimes whenever I am able to kind of move my ideas up the chain of command.
Yeah, and it's vital to understand that sometimes having that seat at the table allows you to make those calls, because sometimes if you're not at the table, it's harder to be heard. And I don't care who, I don't care how charismatic a person think they can be. Sometimes not having that title keeps them out of the room altogether. And if you're not in the room, sometimes you're not going to have your voice heard, although you may have the best idea. So sometimes for those that are kind of thinking about leadership roles, or, hey, well, I don't want to be a leader by title because I influence well enough, you're going to still have a different level of influence if you have certain titles that have a leadership background to it, like a deputy chief or a sergeant, a corporal,
right.
president of something.
And that's what I tell people all the time. And I've talked to a lot of even officers where I'm like, you're a really good officer. You make a great lieutenant. You make a great captain and a warden one day. And they're like, oh, I'm okay being an officer. You know, I can make my impact here. And I'm like, yes, you can. But imagine the impact that you can make when you move up and that you are able to get that seat at the table. Because even though before I had good ideas, now when my staff have good ideas, I can bring them to the table. I can empower them. I can give them that voice. Someone has a great staff wellness idea, or I had one staff member who was in another department. He was in recreation. He brought in, you know, a public speaker. And when I saw it and I heard it, I was able to communicate that up to our warden to be like, this was a great program. Let's put it at every institution. So if you're not able to bring people up with you and kind of create a bigger impact, you've got to be able to move up to be able to do that.
From a leader standpoint, how much does it frustrate you when people are not pursuing their full potential that you can see?
Oh, I'm definitely the one that continues to motivate them.
Yeah.
I know one officer right now I can think of off the top of my head that he just always smiles at me because I told him how frustrated I was at him one time, because when he first got in, I saw the potential that he had, and I was like, why haven't you put in for this job yet? Like, I want to see your light shine bigger. And he was like, I know. And, you know, and now he's in that position. He finally took it. And he's like, you're right. Good. He's like, it's a lot of work, but I can see like myself training new staff, and I can see the changes. And even though you're not going to make an impact with everyone, the impact that you do make, that you know is going to be solid compared to, you know, not putting in for that position, and then someone else gets it that may not have the leadership characteristics, and then you're seeing the impact that they're making, maybe not not as positive as you would have made it.
Yeah, and it's cool when you see those people thriving now and getting themselves built up, and that is one of the joys of being in a formal by title leadership role, is that you have those opportunities to kind of speak life into people's careers. And once again, when you're sitting at the table, if you're at least in the room, you may be able to say a few words to kind of help get them to that role. Like someone say, hey, who's Michael Laitler?
You bring them to the table and say,
yep,
yes. And you bring them to that table and you give them the room to shine. And then when other people see it, and then you see that other people see their potential, that really motivates you.
Yeah. And that's I think one of the more unspoken or unwritten like joys of leadership is when you're able to bring that person up that, you know, that's kind of been on the fence, and they've probably been on the fence a lot longer in their career than they should have. And they just needed that one motivational person to kind of say, hey, I'll be behind you for this. And they take it and now they love it. It's like, okay, I can see why I was pushing so hard. I see the joy behind this now.
Exactly. And you can't do that unless you have a seat at the table.
No, and it's true. Yeah, that is 100% true. So, folks, if you're thinking about getting a seat at the table, or you're trying to make a bigger impact, find ways to do it. Find different avenues that allow you to kind of hit that mark. because there's always ways to do it. You just got to be creative. I mean, it may not be the most obvious way, but it's definitely a way to do it.
Yeah, and you're someone that is motivated about whatever agency that you may work at, but you may be a little, disgruntled about certain things, you can't change those things unless you're going to be that voice to make the changes. You can hope and wish that someone else does, but you could also try to put yourself in a position to do it yourself.
Yeah. Yeah. Sometimes you gotta be that lead, that change agent for what you're shooting for. So as I always promise you and the people that are listening, I try to keep it to a certain time. So I'm not going to keep them longer, but I'm sure they're going to be asking for you to come back because I definitely enjoyed all the knowledge you were able to bring tonight. If people were looking for you, what would be the best way for them to find you?
The best way to find me is LinkedIn. I communicate really well through there. So if you shoot me a message or, a comment on anything that I post, I'll respond pretty quickly.
Yeah, I do love me some LinkedIn. I always tell people every show, I think I have to push it out there because that's where I see most things. It is a professional network, so it definitely helps promoting some of the leadership, mental wellness, resiliency, law enforcement concepts that we have that we're trying to put out there. I think it's a great platform for that. So yes. So folks, if you're looking for Andrea, LinkedIn, find her, or her name and information will be in the show notes. Any final words for the audience?
Thank you so much.
No problem. Any final words?
I just say, focus on yourself and find those ways of making the positive impact that you want to make for whatever agency you work for, while at the same time, creating habits and figuring out that balance for yourself so that you can manage some of the stress in a better way long term.
Well, if you guys ever listen to me, it's definitely the same sentiment that I use. Definitely, and it sounds selfish, and it's only selfish if you don't know better. But you got to focus on yourself first. If you want to be a better person, if you want to be a better spouse, a better parent, a better child to your parents, if you want to be a good employee, you have to know things that are going on with you. You have to know things you need to improve on, things you're already good at. But if you're not focusing on that, then you're not going to get there. So Andrea highlights it very well. And definitely once you know yourself and you focus on it more often, you're going to see the results that you're looking for.
Thank you so much for having me on the show.
Oh, no problem. Hey, guys and gals, you guys, I know you guys had heard a great episode, as I told you early on. And I've been working on getting her on the show for a while because, once again, we've known each other literally for over 10 years. We sat in the same training class. And I've seen the work that she continues to do in a setting that's not always the most exciting to do it in, but I can see the impact. And I know what she's done there will provide impact to all of you that's listening across the country and more likely in other parts of the world as well. But guys, I thank you for listening. Ladies, I'm happy that you guys were able to be involved because I love to see the different dynamics of all the different guests we have on. And Andrea, you definitely hit that. But everybody, once again, thank you for listening. Thank you for sharing and liking and comment. I know you haven't done it yet, but you're probably thinking about, so make sure you do. make sure you bring this episode to people you know, because you never know who you can impact just by sharing it. But definitely, guys, thank you for everything. I appreciate everything all of you do. Stay safe. You guys have a great day.
You've been listening to the LEO First Podcast. Michael has been in law enforcement since 2005. He's worked for 3 law enforcement agencies in 3 different states. He's a professional speaker who travels the country teaching about leadership development and self-awareness. And he's the author of a book called Greatness Beyond the Badge: The 3 Key Principles for Self-Awareness. It's Michael's passion to bring law enforcement members' stories to the front, so you get the real and raw take. We hope you've enjoyed the show. Make sure to like, rate, and review. And we'll be back soon. But in the meantime, hook up with Michael on YouTube, Instagram, and LinkedIn at Michael Laidler, on Twitter at Michael A. Laidler, on Facebook at Michael Laidler Leadership. Send an email to michael@michaelalaidler.com and hit the website at michaelalaidler.com. See you next time on the LEO First Podcast.
Note, on vehicle advising him to remove it.